I think a sustainable pension plan is similar to a sustainable community. It's simply a plan that will meet the needs of all of its stakeholders over the long term. A sustainable pension plan has 5 characteristics. It should provide an appropriate set of benefits. It should have an acceptable level of costs. It should provide members with a lifetime benefit. It should be fair. It should respect intergenerational equity. Finally, it should do what it's supposed to do in both good circumstances and in bad. Sustainability just doesn't happen. There are 3 levers available to manage sustainability in pension plans: the benefits that define the plan, the contributions that go into the plan, and the investment income that is earned on the contributions made to the plan. In addition to the 5 characteristics, a truly sustainable pension plan will have flexibility in all 3 of these levers. Before I provide you with an overview of today's presentation, let me tell you what this presentation is not. It is not a rant about public sector pension plans. The OMERS plan is fundamental to both municipal employees and employers. It is not a rant against defined benefit plans. And it's not about whether the typical OMERS member earning X dollars per year deserves to have it. What this presentation about is the stark reality facing the OMERS pension plan and other plans like it. All public sector plans across the country have similar challenges. These challenges are certainly not unique to OMERS. First, I will provide an overview on OMERS and then talk about some of the factors affecting defined benefit plans in general. Then I'll move on to what other governments are doing to address pension sustainability and tell you about OMERS views and efforts to make OMERS more sustainable. And finally, I'll let you know what a lack of ability to take action has cost the plan. On this first overview slide, you see that OMERS is a large plan. It's one of the largest pension plans in Canada, with over 900 employers. Among its 400,000+ members, we have 266,000 active members and over 120,000 pensioners. We have $60.5 billion in assets, $59.2 billion in actuarial value of assets. Here we see that many of the numbers involved with pension plans aren't as hard as one would like them to be. The $60.5 billion in assets is what's called the market value of assets. That market value, much of it, is based on assessed values of assets owned by the OMERS plan, such as golf town or toll roads or various portions of real estate. In order to smooth out some of the bumps of investment gains and losses, we use what's called an actuarial value of assets for the funding. That actuarial value of assets is $59.2 billion. By taking the difference between the $69.1 billion in liabilities and the $59.2 billion in funding assets, we end up with a $9.2 billion funding deficit and 86% funded ratio. If you look at the little circle diagram, you'll see how the liabilities are distributed within the OMERS plan. And with only 40% of the liabilities associated with retired members, this is still a somewhat young plan. It is not nearly as mature or as old as some of the other public sector plans in the province of Ontario. Since the 1990s, there have been several benefit improvements to the OMERS plan. In 1992, indexing was increased to 70%, and then 100% in 1999. The 30 and out unreduced early retirement provision was adopted in 1992. In 1998, spousal benefits were improved to 66 2/3% from 60%. Back in 1988, they had been improved from 50 to 60%, or improved to 60 from 50%. In 1999, the CPP offset of 0.7% per year of service times earnings up to the YMPE was reduced to 0.675, thereby increasing benefits earned below the CPP earning ceiling by 2%. In 1999 to 2002, there were several early retirement windows. Contribution holidays were in effect from August 1, 1998 to the end of 2002. Needless to say, many of these benefit changes and contribution holidays set the stage for where the plan is today. In just the 5 years ending December 31st, 2012, the contribution rates have increased about 40%. Average plan return has been about 3%. And we have a plan deficit that still requires additional funding over the next 10 to 15 years. It's important to realize, in looking at the funding of the OMERS plan, that contribution rates are not firm, hard costs. Contribution rates are set by periodic actuarial evaluations where assumptions are made regarding many factors including fund returns, inflation, salary increases, life expectancy, etc. So funding a pension plan is not like buying consumer goods. You buy an iPhone or a tube of toothpaste. Once you buy it, the deal's done. Sellers don't come back and say, sorry, we didn't quite get the cost of our product right for that toothpaste you bought 5 years ago, and we need some more money from you. But that's exactly what happens in pension plans when members and employers contribute to the plan, assuming that they've paid for the benefits, but then a deficit occurs later on, requiring further contributions from various parties to deal with that. So we don't know exactly what pensions payable 10, 20, 30 years in the future will cost, but we have to charge something, and we make our best effort to do so. So determining the contribution rates for a pension plan are far from being an exact science, and oftentimes is much more like an art. Funding, or the contribution rate, consists of two components: a service cost component and a deficit payments component. The service cost component is the value or the cost of benefits being earned in the upcoming 12-month period. Deficit payments, like mortgage payments, pay for this deficit that has arisen and shown up in the last valuation. At the last valuation, December 31st, 2012, there was a blended rate of 21.38%, which will start being made in January 1, 2014. This blended rate is a combination of a service cost for active members of 16.09% and a deficit financing cost of 5.29%. In other words, a large chunk of that 21.38% has to deal with financing the deficit. Now, what happens with the 21.38 blended rate is that OMERS goes through a process of distributing that requirement among NRA 65 and NRA 60 members, whereupon you'll see that the NRA 65 members will contribute 18% up to the YMPE, or the Canada Pension Plan earning ceiling, and 29.2% above. For NRA 60 members, the rates are 18.6% to the YMPE and 31.8% above the YMPE. You'll note there is no cap on contributions to the OMERS Pension Plan, so no matter how bad a deficit could get, contributions would continue to rise. And contributions is split 50-50 between sponsors and active members. How do OMERS contributions compare? It's a question people often ask. You can see from this next chart that OMERS, in comparison to the other public sector plans in Ontario, has a contribution rate that is in the middle but towards the high end. Interestingly enough, all of these pension plans, which have contribution rates that vary considerably, essentially have the same benefits. So why do these rates vary? Well, they vary for a number of reasons. They vary based on the assumptions that are used and the valuations that determine those contributions. They vary based on how deficit financing is dealt with. They vary based on the actuarial methodology. Like depreciation in accounting, actuarial methodology can, for the same benefit, develop different levels of cost and different patterns of recognizing cost. For the next 6 slides, we will look at the factors that affect DB pension plans in general. We can see that over the last 30 plus years, expected returns on Canadian equity, which is an investment category that is expected to provide a lot of return to pension plans, we can see that those returns have been in the decline. In the 1980s, they averaged about 13.6% per year. In the 1990s, they averaged about 10.4% per year. In the 2000s, they averaged about 8.9% per year. Interestingly enough, all of these factors don't just affect defined benefit plans, they affect defined contribution plans as well. Canadian equity markets have been very volatile. If we look at the 1980s, the top return in any 1 year in that decade was 34.8% positive. The worst return in any given year was minus 9.1% for a range of returns of 43.9%, which gives a sense as to the level of volatility. Interestingly enough, only 1 year in that decade was there a negative return. In the 1990s, you can see that the range is very similar. The best rate was 29.4% for any given year. The worst return was minus 13.7% in any given year for a range of 43.1%. However, in this decade, there were 3 years in which returns were negative. You go to the 2000s, and you can see returns are much more volatile. The top end is not all that different at plus 33.9% in 1 year. But in 2008, we saw the Canadian equity markets return a minus 31.3% for a range in returns for that decade of 65.2%. And again, 3 of the years in that decade, we saw negative returns. And how have OMERS returns compared against other plans? We can see from this chart the solid line indicating the returns that OMERS has seen year by year from 2002 to 2012. The returns of all 5 plans are similar, but clearly not identical. Whether OMERS returns are better or worse can be hard to determine by this, as any given plan will do better than other plans in any given year, and really must look at returns much more over time. But what is interesting is that over the last 4 years, we can see that the OMERS Pension Plan seems to be lagging some of the other large public sector plans. We have an interest in looking at the volatility of real rates of return because when we're looking at pension plans that provide 100% protection against inflation, it's really the return over and above inflation that is what is critical. And so what we can see is that in the 1980s, we saw real rates of return of only about 6% per year, inflation being quite high in that decade. 1990s, inflation was tamed a bit, and we saw real returns of 8% per year. And then 2000s, where inflation has very much been under the control of the Bank of Canada, we've seen real returns averaging about 5% per year. Again, volatility in these returns affects the volatility of the cost of the plan. Life expectancy beyond age 65 has been increasing significantly. If we look at people born in 1939, they weren't even expected to live beyond age 65. People generally born in 1974 were expected to live 7 to 8 years beyond age 65. In 2009, people born in 2009, people are expected to live a significant period longer. It's this growth or this extension of life expectancy beyond age 65 that is contributed to the increasing cost of pensions in Canada, the UK, and the US. Interestingly enough, the increase in life expectancy in Canada has actually been greater than both of the other 2 countries. Not only are people entering the workforce later, they've been retiring earlier. And so what we end up with is an additional pressure on DB pension plans as that people aren't participating as long as they used to. However, they're drawing benefits for much longer. In 1970, we see that member might have been employed for 46 years and expected to receive benefits for 13. In 2009, it's much closer to see members participating for 38 years and expecting to receive benefits for 23 years. This extension of the retirement period and the shrinkage of the participation period have both affected the cost patterns of the plan and are factors towards the increase in the cost of the plan. So as we see, there are many pressures on OMERS. We are currently seeing record contribution rates, and this is a problem not just for sponsors, but it's a problem for members who have seen significantly reduced take-home pay. The liability discount rate of 6.5%, which I mentioned earlier, is at the high end. It's very unlikely that the discount rate would go up, and much more likely that it might go down, perhaps even in the near term. Active plan membership is aging. We know, in fact, that this will increase the service costs for the next 5 to 7 years. If nothing else changes, this alone will increase the cost of the plan. Investment returns are average. They're not stellar, and the investment returns themselves are not sufficient to turn around the deficits that we've seen. People are living longer. How much longer they will live and how much longer we'll see improvements to life expectancy, we don't know. But it's a big unknown factor that will contribute to the pressure on the OMERS plan. With a funded ratio under 90%, there's a significant proportion of the contributions that go towards deficit financing, increasing the inequity between the different generations that have contributed to the pension plan. So to improve the funded ratio, we've been told that everything must go right for a very long period of time, say for over 10 years, and this puts a lot of pressure on the OMERS plan. Many things are happening outside of Ontario to deal with these pressures that we've just reviewed. Federally, they have introduced changes to OAS, CPP, the Public Service Superannuation Plan, to reflect improvements to life expectancy and reduce ongoing costs. 4 provinces, BC, Alberta, Quebec, and Nova Scotia, have all introduced legislation to increase the flexibility in pension plans so that earned benefits can be reduced if they can't be supported financially. In Quebec, they set up an expert committee to respond to the deteriorating financial position of pension plans in Quebec. New Brunswick introduced shared risk plans to ensure plans can be supported financially and to improve the province's books. Both Alberta and Prince Edward Island currently are proposing major changes to their public sector plans, 4 plans in Alberta and 2 in PEI. Clearly, the challenges that we've been seeing over the last 10 years have forced various parties, various public sector plans, various governments across the country to respond and to take action. In Ontario, the Drummond Report in February of 2012 reviewing how to make the Ontario provincial finances better highlighted concerns about government's exposure to pension liabilities and costs. Provincial government ultimately negotiated the capping of contribution rates for jumbo public sector plans. It initially tried to legislate these caps, but due to the complexity of the pension plans and the complexity of pensions in general, negotiations was the only route really available to the provincial government. But in fact, all the plans were capped. However, OMERS is not reflected directly in the books of the province, so OMERS was not part of the effort by the provincial government to cap its contribution rates. Interestingly enough, even before the Drummond Report, some pension plans had started to adjust their cost structures through benefit indexing. The Ontario Teachers Plan has reduced guaranteed indexing for benefits after 2009 and subsequently made indexing on all benefits earned after 2012 dependent upon affordability of the indexing. The Healthcare of Ontario Pension Plan, HOOP, has reduced guaranteed indexing for benefits earned after 2005. The Colleges Plan, CAT, has had conditional indexing for some time. Neither OPSU or OpTrust, the other 2 jumbo plans, have introduced any changes to their indexing. What has OMERS' response to date been? In its 2012 report to members, it implemented a 3-point deficit reduction strategy. It indicated that contribution rates have been increased for 2011, 2012, and 2013, further increasing intergenerational equity or inequity and placing greater burden on active plan members, by the way. There was a benefit reduction for members leaving employment before being eligible for retirement. And an investment strategy designed to generate strong and stable investment earnings over the long term has been in place. But clearly, this was not a change due to the fact that the deficit exists. And there's no evidence that OMERS' investment strategy actively reflects the problems caused by the economic challenges facing OMERS. We're not sure how to characterize OMERS' response to date, but maybe one word for this would be tepid. One of the things that the 2012 report to members doesn't do is provide answers to a number of questions that many people have been asking. What would be the implication of another 2008 happening in the next 3 years? What are the implications of assumptions having to change in the plan, and what would their impact be on the plan liabilities? What are the consequences if long-term anticipated investment returns aren't realized? While these issues might be discussed at the AC/SC board levels, there's no evidence of any communication on these issues to plan members. So what's AMO's perspective on all of this? As I mentioned earlier, clearly OMERS contribution rates are too high, hurting municipal budgets and hurting municipal employees. Contributions to OMERS have increased rapidly over the past 5 years, reducing funds available for other needs. There appears to be no public recognition of this problem at OMERS, and that is a problem. AMO's SC reps have not been able to negotiate the 2/3 majority needed for benefit modifications, and they've been proposing benefit modifications every year since 2007 that would have implemented action to moderate the increase in contributions that we've seen. Through MEPCO, AMO has been more active in helping the municipal stakeholders understand these issues. Doing nothing is not an option. Investment returns alone cannot be expected to deal with challenges facing DB plans. Other Ontario public sector plans have shown they understand this by replacing automatic indexing with contingent indexing. The OMERS Sponsors Corporation, the SC, continues to be unable to negotiate temporary benefit adjustments necessary to deal with these increasing contribution rates. Interestingly, had the parties been able to negotiate proposals put forward by AMO's SC reps in 2007, the deficit we see today of $9.9 billion could be $2 to $3 billion lower, and the blended contribution rate we see today of 21.38% could be lower by 3%.